I guess first I'd like to say thank y'all for all the prayers. I could tell I was being prayed for, and it's just good to know that my church family supports me in these many endeavors I've taken on over the last few years. And so I'd just like to say thank you. The trip ultimately was a success, so I guess your prayers were heard. We can go to the next slide. So my purpose of this trip was three main things. I wanted to become familiar with the culture. I wanted to network with current teams down there already and then see what needs were there and I guess what roles they needed. And when I say they, I'm referring to Pioneers, the mission organization with which I worked. And the third thing was to compare and contrast to my previous experience in Indonesia. I was pleasantly surprised with the culture. South America, just in general, the people are very friendly. They like to dance and have a good time. The food was way better than Indonesia, so that's a positive. But I just felt like the differences in culture in South America aren't nearly as drastic as the differences in culture in Asia. Asia was a pretty big hurdle to adjust to, and when you're doing mission work, ultimately it's all about the long game. Obviously, short-term trips and short-term missions, they have their own successes, and the Lord uses people for that. He actually, in this current stage of life, the Lord's using me in a lot of short-term applications. But when you're working with an indigenous peoples group and you really want to connect with people, the longer you're there, usually the better. And I said all that to say, the ease with which you assimilate into a culture is going to just affect your effectiveness. Affect your effectiveness. I don't know if I can say that. Affect your effectiveness. I think I can say that. Okay. Yeah, so if you can mesh well with the people, if you can make friends quickly, if you can share the same type of humor as whatever culture you're in, well, obviously you're going to be able to make friends better. And I feel like South America, just for me personally, I fit in a lot better. They actually share a lot of the same humor. So I haven't found a culture yet that shares the same sports, so I've just accepted the fact I'm going to have to like soccer and get used to it. But I think America is the only place of real football, if I'm not mistaken. And then, let's see. So yeah, I became familiar with the culture. So Pioneers, let's go to the next slide. It'll clear some stuff up. So all of you, I guess everyone in the room, y'all obviously know Katie Lynn and Nim, and I had the privilege of them being my chauffeurs as I got to travel around Peru. So these 5 blue stars that you see are the 5 different locations that I was able to spend time in. And having Katie Lynn and Nim was a lifesaver. I mean, the trip wouldn't have been the same without them. Obviously, they speak the language, they know the culture, they have connections, and they've made a lot of mistakes themselves that I didn't have to make this time to travel around. So of the 2 weeks I was there, maybe 12, 13 days, I think the first 9 days I slept in a different location every night. So we were on the road. We got to see a lot. And the star in the middle, see if y'all see Brazil, if you look directly left, that star in the middle, that's the city of Pucallpa. And Pioneers has a missions base there. And so if you hear me ever reference Pucallpa or Pioneers, that's where they're located. And the purpose of that team or that base they have there is to train any missionary who feels called to the Amazon jungle. That's your launching point. They actually call it the launch team. And if you want to learn Spanish and learn about indigenous lifestyles, Pioneers will send you to that location. You can go to the next slide. So we had those 5 different cities that I stayed in, and 2 were extremely important, the first of which was Puerto Maldonado. Now, the picture you see there, I don't know how clear it is, but the 2 white guys in the back, that's me and then my friend named Britt Smallwood. Britt Smallwood has been a longtime friend of mine, and he's actually, I would say, a partner in ministry. We feel like in the future we're probably going to work together on a team on the foreign mission field together. So he was able to accompany me on this trip, and I'll speak more about him later because with my next year, I will actually be rooming with him. Obviously, y'all recognize Nim, the front left. The 2 guys in the middle, they're Peruvian Christians, And the man in the white shirt, his name is Juan Carlos, and he's a Peruvian missionary. He knows practically everything there is to know about missions in Peru, and just about every team, everyone. If you need to know anything about missions, he's the man to go to. And he is a full-time missionary / pastor, and his goal is to train indigenous Peruvian, I guess the term is nationals. So he trains national pastors and missionaries. There's a growing movement in the Amazon where instead of having so many Westerners come to the Amazon and burn out quick, it's tough to stay in the jungle for a long time, and you see a high turnover rate when you go to the Amazon. It's just a tough place to live. So there's a growing movement where their missionaries are seeking to train national pastors and leaders to do the work itself. If you take someone who was born in the village, it's home to him. He's not going anywhere. And if he's a believer, well, why not equip him to minister to his own brothers and sisters? So there's a big movement happening now, and Juan Carlos is spearheading some of that. And on this particular trip, you can go to the next slide, we were actually going upriver, not on the Amazon specifically, but a river that flows into the Amazon, to visit a small village. And in this village, there's a small church of probably about 15 people. I don't know how many people are in the village, the population. I want to say around 500 or so. But there's a small church, and this church is pretty representative of many churches within the Amazon. So there's plenty of places in the Amazon that have no missionaries, and there are a lot of places that have very little gospel presence. Of those villages that have very little gospel presence, most of the churches there, they just need help. And when I say help, they need materials and training. So, if you could just pick any random Peruvian village and there are Christians there, there's probably not that many, and there might not even be a pastor. So on this trip, Juan Carlos and Nim were there to connect with the pastor of this small church in this village and try and give him a little bit of advice and give him other people he can network with to try and help build up that church in that local community. You can go to the next slide. Just a little side note, this boat behind us, that's probably the most common form of transportation other than a motorcycle. Some of these villages you can only get to by boat or by plane. There's not even a road getting there. And so these boats are extremely common, and I spent a lot of time in one of these on this most recent trip. And that's actually a Cadillac compared to many of the other boats that we've had to ride in. You can go to the next slide. So after my little stint in the jungle, we went to visit an ex-mayor of Puerto Maldonado. So that first city that we went to, the fella in the top left, he's pictured there, he used to be the mayor of this fairly large city, and he just so happens to be a Christian, and he wants to help out national Peruvian pastors and missionaries. So he bought this land, and he's put some cattle on it, he's planted a bunch of trees, and he's looking to use the revenue from that investment to help fund and equip national Peruvians who are interested in ministry. Those tall trees in the background, it's just a little fun fact. Those are Brazil nut trees. I don't know if y'all recognize those nuts in the store. They're really large Brazil nuts. Yeah, I think they're pretty good anyway. They're actually they're expensive here. I mean, at Walmart, they're probably a handful is about $5, but over there you can get a bag for pretty cheap. And you're getting it right from the source. But that's just a little side note. You can go to the next slide. So you can't go to Peru without going to Machu Picchu. I don't know how many of y'all are familiar with Machu Picchu, but if you ever watch National Geographic, you've probably seen a picture of it. I believe it's one of UNESCO's World Heritage Sites. And that was just a fun little tour stop that we got to do. That city that you're looking at, it's all made obviously out of stones, but the Incans built it almost 1,000 years ago, and the structure is still standing. So it's impressive just to see. Go to the next slide. The second major town that we got to visit was Iquitos. Now I'll make this note here. So the two the two major stopping points on this trip were Puerto Maldonado, which we just talked about. That's in southern Peru. Iquitos is in northern Peru. So I got to compare and contrast the southern jungles with the northern jungles. There's a little bit of a difference. There's a difference in people and a difference in physical geography or topography. I just so happen to enjoy the northern jungle a bit more, which is actually where Katie Lynn and Nim have lived for a long time. Well, a long time. That's where they worked with the Napo. The village that they stayed in for a year and a half was in the northern jungle. So this picture here, give you a little backstory on it. We had spent about 2 days traveling to get to a small village off of a river very close to the Amazon. We'll just call it the Amazon for the sake of ease. So we traveled 2 days to get to this small remote location, and we were going to meet up with a fella who owned a canoe, and he was going to take us upriver to the small village. But when you're traveling in places like this, there's really no good cell phone service. You never know what the river's going to do. You never know if the boat broke down or anaconda attacked the driver or something. So you never know if your boat's going to be there when they say it's going to be there. Our boat just so happened to not be there, and we got stuck in this city, and it's sunset, sun's going down, and we don't have anywhere to stay. So we're kind of walking around looking for a hostel, and couldn't really find anything. Went to one place, and it was a little sketchy. I'll tell you about it later. But we ended up I don't know if it just so happened, if it was providence, coincidence, whatever it was, but Nim ended up running into an old friend of his from his hometown in Cusco. And his old friend is actually a pastor in that small little town, and he ended up putting us up for the night, let us take a shower, and they fed us. So that's why this picture's there. The following day, we got to visit a village where Katie Lynn and Nim have some friends. Now, the village that I was able to visit, you can go to the next slide, was not the exact same village that Katie Lynn and Nim spent a lot of time in, but I got to visit some of the same people that they had become close to. And so we spent the night with Katie Lynn and Nim's friends. I got to meet some indigenous believers, but because of the language barrier, didn't really get to communicate much with them. But I could definitely tell that Katie Lynn and Nim have put in a lot of work with this couple, and both couples mutually respect each other very much. You can go to the next slide. This is actually their house. So the top left picture, I know it's hard to see, but the smaller guy sitting down, that is, I guess, Katie Lynn's godfather, you would call it. And then on the right, the woman in yellow with the bucket, that's her godmother. And they fed us and took care of us for the 2 nights there. And they actually gave us a chicken to take home. I don't think they realized you can't take it onto the plane, but they gave it to us anyway. And we ended up giving it to a friend on the way down the river. You can go to the next slide. And that canoe, like I told you earlier, the boat we were in was a Cadillac. That's normally what you ride in, is a dugout canoe just like that. And you throw your stuff in it and go up and down the river. Now, I had to say I was very impressed with Katie Lynn. She spent 3 days in a boat like that with no top, no nothing. I think she said she just sat under an umbrella for 3 days traveling upriver. So I didn't get to go to any places that were extremely remote, namely because of lack of time. It just takes time to get to some of these remote locations. But the village I stayed in was remote enough, I think, for my first trip. It was definitely wasn't staying in a Ritz-Carlton. But I feel like I'm rambling a little bit. The trip was a success. I realized that I like South American culture. I did learn, I'm not so sure, let's just say from first impressions, I don't know if I'm cut out for jungle ministry. Like I said, jungle ministry, it's hard. You really need a good team behind you. And being single now and not having formed a team yet of even close friends, I'm a little apprehensive about running off into the jungle, but I'm definitely open to it. And this trip was very successful in showing me that. I think a lot of people get this romantic idea of living in the jungle, but it's honestly really, really boring. Like, you spend a lot of time doing nothing. And when I say nothing, I mean what we would consider nothing. And another aspect to jungle ministry that I didn't really think about is the fact that you're kind of boxed in. Like you live in your village and it's nothing but jungle around you and there's really nowhere to go. Now obviously you can hop on a boat and travel 3 days to some small city, or you can just go on a little walkabout in the woods, but really you have to be committed to that place. And I guess I was speaking with y'all a while ago, I really like to be in and out of places. I like to be on the move, especially in this stage of life. And I just kind of know that living in a small tribal context like that, I would probably get cabin fever a little quick. So I'm open to it, definitely. Apart from the jungle, though, there's still plenty of opportunities, or there's still plenty of need in South America. You don't necessarily have to be in the jungle to be used down there as a missionary. So South America itself has obviously multiple different countries in it. In Brazil, that culture is going to be pretty different because they speak a different language. We're colonized by different people. But all in all, I was able to network with a lot of good teams, find out what the needs were, what the needs weren't, and as well, I got to know Katie Lynn and them a little bit better, and have much more respected them before, but have much more respect for them now for the work that they've done. And so for my next stage of life, let's see, it's December now. In January, I'll be moving to Athens. And for that next year, I'll be living with my friend that I mentioned previously. His name's Britt Smallwood. Currently, he works with a ministry called Campus Crusade. I don't know if any of y'all have heard of them or familiar with them, but they focus on discipling young college students. He's going to be doing that for a year or two, and I will be working on some seminary classes. Now, I won't be taking them from an accredited seminary, but I'll be auditing seminary classes. Some of the requirements for pioneers, they want you to have a good understanding of the Bible and be able to defend it well whenever people ask you about your faith. And I assume it's going to take me about a year to do that. As well, over the course of the next year and a half, I'll be raising support and trying to figure out exactly where it is the Lord wants to use me. I will probably visit 2 more locations before I make a decision to commit. When it comes to missions, like I said earlier, it's all about the long game. So if I'm going to commit to something, I want to make sure somewhere where I know that I can, one, be used and be needed. I've tried Asia, don't really think I fit in there, so I will probably visit Africa when the time is available, whenever this new variant's not going haywire. And then I might visit, there's a team that Pioneers has in Kazakhstan that I was slightly interested in. So over the next year and a half, I'll be taking these classes, researching more places and teams, and raising support. And I hope to be wherever I'm going and doing whatever I'm doing in it's 2022, the spring of 23. So it'll be a year and a little bit, maybe a year and a half before I end up on the field. So this is a time of research and preparation. And that's about it. Do what? All jokes aside, I'm not kidding. So look, open up a can of worms. All right, we're going to get way off track. There's 2, what's the word I'm looking for? There's 2 camps of thought when it comes to finding a wife. Some people say, son, just trust in the Lord and she'll be there. I'm 27, she ain't here. So I'm of the camp now, you need to increase your chances by being in an area where there are more single women who are interested in missions. So I'm also looking for a wife over the next year or so. I would like to go to the field married, but if not, that's okay. So if you need something to pray about, don't worry about malaria, don't worry about dysentery, you pray for a wife for Colson. But if y'all got any questions, please ask. Questions about Peru, about missions, about anything, can ask away.
The areas that you visited in southern Peru, what benefit did you derive in visiting those places?
Let's see, southern Peru, I wasn't there long enough to pick out the cultural differences in people. What stood out to me was it's just more pleasant in the northern jungle. What's your question specifically again?
Yeah.
what were the differences that I saw, or what was the benefit of Southern? Okay. Yeah, I guess Central and Southern Peru are a bit more evangelized already. There's a little bit more of a gospel presence already there, as opposed to the Northern jungles. There's a little bit more unreached, uncontacted groups in the Northern jungle. Nim could tell you all the differences in culture between the two, but the reasons that the cities were colonized kind of determined how the gospel came into those areas. So in Southern Peru, there's a lot of like anthropologists and biologists, and the rubber boom was big in that area. So you had a lot of these rich like land barons that came down and exploited the peoples. But then you also at the same time had a lot of Catholic missionaries coming over and spreading the gospel. So the people in the Southern jungle, they kind of have this oral history of like the evil white man coming down. And it just so happened the same time these evil rubber barons were coming in, the gospel was also coming in at the same time. So there's a little bit of you get a little bit of pushback from people who have prior experience with white people in the jungle. And now the rubber boom happened 50, 60, maybe 70 years ago. And so there's a whole generation or two who doesn't really have much contact with the Western world, but it's in their oral history now to fear the white man, fear this gospel, that news, this, that, and the other. So that's probably one of the, as far as the missionary is concerned, that's one of the differences that I noticed.
So there are jungles down in the southern area as well as
Mm-hmm.
north?
Oh, we got the map. That blue, all right, you see Ecuador and Colombia, all of Brazil. Let's see, let me take this back. All right, Peru's got a sea in it, the sea that wraps around Brazil, how it hugs Brazil. If you split Peru in half and kind of followed the curve of the country, the right half is all jungle, the left half is desert and mountains. So it's tons of jungle. The Amazon's massive. Practically all of Brazil is the jungle. Half of Peru is the jungle. More than half of Ecuador, almost all of Colombia is jungle. And there's people everywhere. Like absolute middle of nowhere, there's somebody out there. I guess one thing I didn't mention, I was talking about Pucallpa earlier, the Pioneers launch team where the base is in central Peru. I spent 3 nights there without Katie Lynn and them. They had some other friends to visit, and that's whenever I was able to network with a lot of the Pioneers teams that are already there. There was one Pioneers team that I was slightly interested in. Apparently they did some work with cattle, chocolate, and coffee in that area. Those are big commodities. The problem is, it's not a problem. I've only had exposure to missions as a business. The missionary term for that, it's an acronym, they call it BAM, Business as Missions. So for my year in Indonesia, my ministry platform was a business. So my mind is kind of wired that way. Already my mind's a little bit wired more towards business. But in the jungle, there's not really opportunities for us to run a business like we consider a business here in the West. In the jungle, when you're subsistence living, you're only worried about storing up enough food for a couple of days. The idea of a business, who are you going to sell to when there's nobody around you? And money to them is something they could take it or leave it, depending upon how rural or how remote you are, because money's not going to do you much good when there's nothing to buy. So the idea of business as a missions in the heart of the jungle, that doesn't fare as well as if you're in a city or in a slightly more developed country where business is common. And that was actually one thing that I made a mental note of. I need to get a bit more exposure to other ministry platforms. So if you're in the jungle, really your only mission is to just build relationships with people. Now you're going to do that through doing everything that the people in the village do. You're going to hunt and fish with them. You're going to eat the same food and weave the same baskets, whatever example you want. But instead of being there with the intent of having a business or like a step-by-step plan. This is my ministry platform. You don't really have that when you're living in a village context. You're just there to befriend people, gain their trust, live life, although their life looks very different. And then through those relationships that you build, that's when you get the opportunity to talk about your faith and share life together.
Dominant is the Catholic influence in Peru still?
Very. I don't know how many people would be practicing, but I would say most everybody who's not in the jungle is a nominal Catholic. And even in the jungle of people who have made professions of faith, you kind of get this synchronism between Catholicism and animism. Some of this, I ran into synchronism of Islam and animism, but in Peru you'll have Catholicism mixed with. And even believers, like people who believe in Jesus, that He is the Son of God, He died for their sins, they're still going to have some opinions and views that we would think are just totally wild, off the wall, and unbiblical. And some of them are, but some of them are just so culturally different, we kind of get shocked at some of the things they believe or explanations for certain events that they have. And it's part of the reason why there's a big need, even in areas where the gospel has made it. There's a lot of, I guess you would call, immature Christians, people who just need a little bit more biblical teaching. But it is a challenge whenever you're working with people who have roots that are just so deep in animism. It is tough to kind of piece out is that doctrinal, is that not, is that biblical, is that not, is this right, is this wrong. It's not as cut and dry as we would like it to be. And that's definitely a challenge working with very rural communities versus communities in the city who have been, I guess, more westernized. They are, for the most part, yeah.
And when you're in a city, when you're in a city environment, are there armed militia?
No, nothing like that. Now, maybe back during the height of COVID, when everybody was really panicking, there might have been a few. And you see like armed guards outside of banks and things like that, but it's extremely safe feeling. Like the capital city, I mean, you feel like you're in Atlanta for the most part. The architecture looks different. It's a different language, but... Oh, well, it's all relative. At least when you're in another country, you don't know if you're in danger. You're so naive, so you can just... Ignorance is bliss, I guess. But I would say most South American countries are kind of like this. Maybe not so much Argentina and Chile because they've got a lot more money. But you can find third world living conditions, developing living conditions, and then first world areas. Lima, no different than America in what people have and do. But then you get into some of these small cities right off of the Amazon, really close to some tribal areas. It's what we would consider third world. But what's different about jungle living, when you get away from the city and you're out in the jungle, we would look at it and say, you don't have much. This is probably third world living conditions. But the people in the jungle are usually pretty happy because they always have food. Rarely do people starve, and if they are starving, they just move to where game is. So that's one. It's kind of weird, like you go to the village and think, oh, look at all these people. They don't have anything. And then kids are running around throwing chickens at each other, having a good time laughing. And, everybody's just in a jovial mood. You wouldn't get that in other places of the world that don't have nearly as many resources as the jungle has. I mean, everybody has a green thumb in the jungle. It's hard to kill stuff. Like kill plants, Like if you can't grow plants here, you should go to the jungle. You can grow them. Any other questions? All right. Well, if you got any more, you can ask me after service.
Amen. Amen. Appreciate that, brother. All right. Well, he's giving us a little bit of time to pray. Y'all didn't ask enough questions, so we are gonna spend some time in prayer. The prayer targets tonight. I did our elder emphasis for this week is Brother Randy, as he oversees our finances and stuff. So we want to remember him. Got Nim, Katie Lynn, and Mia down as well. And then also our projects. We got a couple of different projects that are going on, and I referenced one, I think, by way of prayer, but the 316 women have undertaken a project for the domestic violence shelter, and so they're going to be ministering to those ladies. So they're getting those materials together even now to share with them. But then also our project with the sheriffs and the jail, ministering to them. We've ordered customized cards to share with them that have the gospel on the back to share with them. And just to minister to them. And so I hope that you will take advantage of that. But I want us to take the Wednesdays before that time specifically to pray for those that will be receiving these cards and gift cards and things. And also the ladies, I think currently there's 6, if I understand correctly, 6 ladies at the domestic violence shelter that we're going to be ministering to. So we do want to remember them, pray for them, and just pray that we will have a positive impact on them, ministering to them and also ministering the gospel to them. And then you see the other needs that are listed here. Anything else that you feel like we need to make sure that we pray about in our small groups when we get there? All right. Well, guys, why don't we come up near the front? Ladies, we'll let you have the rear of the auditorium, and we'll spend some time in the prayer in the time that we've got remaining.